your laptop on here?
So I'll send it on my
Oh, you just said okay, good. So if it's just an iffy angle, you can just change it. But yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Have a good evening. I'll see you tomorrow.
Yes.
I can ask everyone to take a seat. Okay?
Well done, Fiona.
Hi. That's very well. Right. Yeah.
I've been in touch with that Lady Eleanor, so I'll do something about it after Easter when everybody's around. Do you want to be in the loop of emails?
I'm fine.
Too many. That's fine. Let me do it.
If I can ask people to just take a seat. Okay. We're just switching with the lapel mics. Is this working now? You can't hear me through the lapel mic. I'll use the external mic. Okay, so one of the great pleasures of being president is that I get to invite people that I want to hear speak at a conference, and someone that I love hearing is Anjana Khatwa. Now, Anjana for me particularly is an amazing person because of what she does for the communities that are minority communities in the UK. And the area of work that she's in is not something that many people from our backgrounds go into. So to have someone championing that is really, really important. And just to give you a little bit of her background, she's an award-winning earth scientist specialising in bringing stories about the origins and formation of natural landscapes to life from a wide range of audiences. Definitely a wide range. You see her on all sorts of TV programmes as well as writing. She's been on our Team Pro show, as well as much more technical programmes like on Sinkholes quite recently. Her debut non-fiction book, published on the 4th of December this year, The Whispers of Rock, Stories from the Earth, tells a global story of how rock has shaped our world and our lives, drawing together science, indigenous knowledge, and wisdom from global majority cultures. Angela reframes our relationship with the geological landscape. And I think it's something that was going to be really important for us teaching geography to make that much more real for our students through the use of this book. And she is currently working as a joint head of inclusion and belonging at the National Trust, which again is an organisation that needs that input from someone from a diverse background. So, great pleasure, and pass over to Anjana for her talk. I think you know now a little bit of time again for questions, so feel free to think about those as you're listening. Thank you so much.
And thank you very much, Nina and the GA, for inviting me to talk to you at this year's conference. This is a huge year for me. This is the year that my book, The Whispers of Rock, is released after a 2-year research, writing and fieldwork period of time. And literally, I haven't seen my family for about 2 years, which is pretty good. Yeah, my husband's kind of listening. Kids, not so much. The Whispers of Rock is a journey, it's a global journey to begin to uncover our relationship with rock and with landscapes. And what I do in the book is I really take a deep dive into what's happened in Western society that's caused a real disconnect between our relationship, our understanding, and our appreciation of the geological world. And what I really wanted to start off with was this image here. I'm going to take the title slide off. It is a beautiful image. It is an art form in its own right. The image has not been altered, it's not been changed. It is my photograph taken on my phone of a sealing cave of a multicoloured sandstone in Petra in Jordan. And the image is beautiful. When you see it with your own eyes, the rock has pink, blue, white, orange, colours that I can't even describe. They are so beautiful. But along with the colours are the patterns and the textures and the fluidity of the rock itself. So as an earth scientist, as a geologist, as a geographer, I go to these landscapes and I look at the rocks and they tell me in quite stark clarity what their stories are. I am able to look at this beautiful formation, and this beautiful formation is actually known in geological terms as the Ishrin Formation. It's about 500 million years old, it's a sandstone. And when I look at the rocks, they speak to me, they whisper their stories. So what is this rock whispering to me? This rock is 500 million years old. The sand grains were washed down from mountains to the south of where current modern-day Jordan is today. And as the rains and the wind eroded those high mountain peaks towards the south, those sand grains were washed down the mountain slopes by rivers. And the sand grains then were washed across a vast plain. Now, 500 million years ago, you have to imagine there were no plants with root systems. Okay, this was quite a primitive time. You were seeing an explosion of life in the oceans. This is Cambrian, kind of the explosion of life during the Cambrian period. But on land, the land was devoid of any kind of life. It is, single-celled organisms. But in terms of plant life, there were none. So you have to imagine rivers washing sand grains across a vast sandy plain. There was nothing there, root systems, to knit together those grains into kind of solid forms. So the rivers were able to course freely across this landscape. And as they did so, those sand grains migrated and moved and shifted and flowed with the water. And when they came to rest in these beautiful arcuate forms. They essentially tell us about the migration of bars, of riverbanks, of sandy riverbeds. And that is what you're looking at in this image. Those are some of the structural features. But what about the colours? Much later, as these sand grains were buried under immense layers of other sedimentary rocks, they were cemented together, and at that later stage, mineral-rich groundwaters filtered through the rock. And what those mineral-rich groundwaters did, they were rich in magnesium and iron and all sorts of other chemicals. They stained the cement that bonded those sand grains together. And this is what gives Petra its beautiful colour. That rose-red city that you hear about all the time, that you see in movies, that you see in photographs. The beautiful colour of the rock owes its origins to these minerals that were washing through the rock itself. And when you become a whisperer of rocks, a rock whisperer if you like, you can begin to uncover these beautiful stories of what our world used to be like. And in some parts of the world, this knowledge has existed for tens of thousands of years. It's just in a way that we don't hear about. It exists, but those voices are often not included in our conversations as geographers and as scientists. And as we kind of uncover some of those stories today together, we have people to thank for the existence of the knowledge, the wisdom that's been passed down to us and generously shared. There are all sorts of people that I've consulted with in the research for the book, Indigenous people across the world, from all sorts of different nations, Native American communities in North America, Inuit communities in Northern Canada, and also Maori communities in New Zealand, Aotearoa, New Zealand. So there are a number of Indigenous people and communities, many who don't want to be identified, that have helped me in the research for this book. And the image you can see behind you, which I'll reference towards the end of the talk, is Delicate Arch. If you've ever been to this landscape, it is utterly extraordinary. It's quite otherworldly, but it is home. It's on the ancestral lands of 11 First Nation tribes. And when we consider landscapes like this, so I'm sure a lot of the audience understands how features like this form. This is alien sandstone, so sandstone deposited about 300 million years ago by an ancient wind. Those sand grains have become cemented together, and then at some point in the distant past, erosional forces have found a point of weakness to carve that arch out of the landscape. But alongside that scientific knowledge, the First Nations people who have lived on these lands for almost 8 to 10,000 years have their own belief systems about what this arch means and what that landscape means to them. And what we are going to do in terms of the theme of collecting geography is begin to look at the connection between these ancient stories, these ancient belief systems, and what we understand as science. Where does my journey begin in all of this? Because I'm sure for all of you who are having conversations about how you engage and how you entice students into this world that you live in as geographers, where did my story begin? And it began with a rock. How could it not? I love rocks, and I'm not ashamed to say that. And my book is a love story. It's an ode of love to rock itself. In my hands, I'm holding a vesicular basalt. That's a technical term for you. It's a basalt. It's a volcanic rock. It's an igneous rock. So it's formed from cooled lava. It's kind of jagged. It's got lots of holes in it where toxic gases were escaping as the lava was cooling as it flowed across the landscape. And it's probably one of my most precious rocks in my collection. I have rocks from all over the world, as you can imagine. Why is it special? Because I collected it when I was 12 years old. Here I am. This is my dad, this is my mum, my sister, my brother, and my aunt and my cousin. And I am standing at the Sheitani lava flows in southeastern Kenya. And my mum and dad are actually from Nairobi. My dad was born in India but left shortly after partition. My mum has been Kenyan through and through for about 3 or 4 generations. And I'm here because I was brought to Kenya to really connect with my Kenyan roots, see my family, spend time with them, and learn about their lives there. And on this kind of holiday as a 12-year-old who grew up in Slough, so this was a pretty amazing moment for me. I kind of saw the world, beyond concrete jungle. My journey to Kenya was life-altering, life-changing. And that was seeing all sorts of amazing wildlife and safaris and things that you probably see in David Attenborough documentaries. But that was all great. But what really resonated with me was these rocks here, the Sheitani lava flows. And as I walked across them, something inside me clicked, it switched. And I knew at that point, that's what I wanted to study. I was 12 years old. I knew that moment when I put that rock in my pocket, this was what I wanted to study. This is what I wanted to become, a storyteller of rocks. But not everyone feels that way about rocks. And I think if you walk outside of this room, outside of the conference, and you talk to anybody, and trust me, I spent 25 years talking to people about rock. Not everybody feels that love. Not everybody understands it either. And I know, I can see the faces there. They're like, they just think I'm mad. And I literally walk away. I said, what do you do for a living? I tell stories about rocks. I can stand by. See you later. They're gone pretty sharpish. I wanted to use this picture to prove a point, actually, because at the time, I think it was last July, was it last June or July? It was just before the summer solstice. And I was planning to go to the summer solstice because I wanted to experience the love and the joy that people felt for Stonehenge and the rocks at Stonehenge. And I used that, in fact, in the end, I used it to open the book. But when this happened on the Tuesday, so the solstice was on the Friday, this happened on the Tuesday, I was shocked, actually. I thought, here is a for some people, it's quite a spiritual place. For a lot of people, it's an incredibly monumental place. I use the word monumental deliberately, so the pun is intended. It's a monumental place of history, archaeology, and a kind of a human connection with the celestial sphere as well as the Earth. And when this happened last year, I kind of reacted in a way that I was upset. It upset me to see this happen. And on Twitter, I kind of quote tweeted the statement put out by Just Stop Oil. And this is what they said. They said, we all have a right to live a life free from suffering, but continued burning of oil, coal and gas is leading to death and suffering on an unparalleled scale. And then they go on to say, this interesting word that they use, standing inert for generations works well for stones, not for climate policy. So first and foremost, I don't disagree with their sentiments. I think we do need to do something about the consumption of fossil fuels on a very global level. I think that is a huge issue. I think we don't really need to go into that. I think we're pretty much all on the same page in this room. What I do have an issue with is using Stonehenge to make that statement. Why? Because where they're referring to the kind of the use of fossil fuels, the continued burning of fossil fuels, that is all related to the relationship we have built with the geological world. It is there to be exploited. It is there to be used. It doesn't deserve our respect. It certainly doesn't deserve our love. And when they go on to say these rocks have stood inert for generations, that really shocked me, because up until that point, I've been speaking to indigenous communities all over the world who have spoken about the animacy of rock, about the life and the stories and the meaning that rock holds for them. So for me, this statement was very problematic, because I thought, if you want to spray Stonehenge orange with orange-dyed cornflower, you are showing a lack of respect, very much in line with the oil companies who are drilling and using and burning fossil fuels and processing them, for us to use in our own way. There is a lack of respect there for the geology of our planet, for the history of our planet, but also for a monument like this that ancient people put up to celebrate the Earth and also the celestial sphere. There's a disconnect there. There's a disconnect between what these rocks are, what they represent, and once you fall into this kind of pattern of looking at them in this way that they are inert, they're almost invisible in the landscape, they don't matter, then we start to enter into problematic situations. Here is one example. What impact have we had on the world now that we have lost that connection with the geological landscape, with rock itself? For a lot of geologists, and I speak to a lot of geologists about this, I'm not particularly popular in this realm, a lot of geologists see rock as an economic resource. What can it be used for? What can we use it for? How can it further our own ideals, our own kind of growth, our success, our lifestyles? What you're looking at here is one of the world's largest cement quarries in the world. It's Gunung Kampan, which is just outside Ipoh, the town of Ipoh in Malaysia. Now, limestone is one of the critical ingredients needed for cement production. What do they do with it? They basically carve out the rock out of the mountain, and this is what you're looking at here is a huge cement quarry. So the rock is being carved out through like a balcony quarrying process. On the other side, what you can see on the other side here is pristine, or what is maybe limited time period, but it would have been pristine rainforest. And the whole landscape itself, it's limestone. So if you are aware of karst landscapes are arcs of biodiversity. What does that mean? They have incredibly unique ecosystems. What supports that? The rock. The rock erodes, it weathers to create soils. The soils support the vegetation supports all the wildlife. So the minute you begin to remove the rock from the landscape, you are damaging quite fragile ecosystems. Cement, I talked about limestone being the raw material for cement. What do they do with it? They basically take the rock, they crunch it into a powder, so they crush it into a powder. Then they bake the powder at very, very high temperatures in kilns to create a product called calcium oxide. Calcium oxide is then shipped all over the world, where it will go to cement processing plant. There's calcium oxide, now here's a weird thing. The calcium oxide is then mixed with water and gravel to create cement. So effectively what you're doing is recreating limestone, but through an artificial process. But the process of harvesting the rock, then baking it, and then shipping it all over the world uses so much carbon dioxide that this is probably one of the most, along with other industries, it's a very big polluter in terms of climate change. But as somebody who loves rocks, we are also losing the story of the rock itself. That limestone, once it's gone, once it's quarried, once it's crushed, its story is lost forever. And I think what I want you to think about is that this limestone probably formed about 150 million years ago, 200 million years ago. It took about 50 million years to form. So this is we can never ever recreate this natural rock in our lifetime. It takes tens of millions of years, but it also takes colossal tectonic forces to bring it up to the surface from the bottom of the seabed. It takes colossal tectonic forces to bring it up to form this landscape that we are now carving into and using for our own purposes. I'm not sure what the answer is, because we do need to build more housing, we do need to support countries who do need that urban development, and I'm not sure quite what the answer is, but is there a more ethical way to harvest rock like this, to quarry it, or do we need to use more sustainable materials? What about people? So the exploitation of rock, we can see that from the previous picture, has an enormous impact on biodiversity, but it's also people that have suffered. And in this talk, you're going to hear a lot about the impacts of colonialism. What you're looking at here is a Lakota chief on horseback. The Lakota are a First Nations tribe. They are their ancestral lands are spread across northern United States. This particular tribe is from South Dakota. Now, their ancestral lands, we're going to talk about them later in the talk, that their ancestral lands were found by the European settlers when they travelled across the United States to house gold and all sorts of other minerals. And then over a period of time, they were dispossessed of their lands so that the European settlers could come in and prospect for gold. So the impact of that kind of economic, it's kind of like the exploitation of geological resources, of mineral resources, has had an impact for hundreds, if not thousands of years on people as well as nature. Having said all of that, what I also do is I want to explore how we can reconnect ourselves with rock itself. I said that my book is a love story about rock, and that's what it is. What I try to do is explore all of these stories told by cultures from across the world to reconnect how we feel about rock. And the reason for this is because we need to nurture this next generation of geographers, this next generation of earth scientists and geologists to feel something about where they live, to feel something about the landscapes they walk through. Because at the moment, what we have is we're almost walking blindly through the landscapes. The rocks are invisible. We don't see them, we don't hear them, we don't feel them. And I know this because I worked for the Jurassic Coast for 15 years, and I met thousands, tens of thousands of people who sat on the beaches and looked at the cliffs, and they were lovely, they had their ice cream, and then they went home. And we often wondered, well, what was the impact of that visit? Did you feel anything when you saw those rocks? How did you interact with them? And this is what we're really interested, or this is what I've been interested in for the last 20 years. And the image you're looking at here is another story that I will talk about. This is Desiree Hernandez. She's 7 years old, and she's at the American Museum of Natural History in New York. She's a member of the Grand Ronde tribe in Oregon, and she is interacting with, as part of a tribal ceremony, her ancestor, an ancestor of her people, who is known as Tamanawas. And Tamanawas is known in Western language as the Willamette meteorite. The meteorite is about 4 billion years old. Okay, so in scientific terms, we have that story. But for Desiree, she has a whole other story that is being passed down to her through generation after generation, through her parents, her grandparents, and so on and so forth. This is quite a powerful statement from the IUCN Specialist Group on Cultural and Spiritual Values. And I showed you that picture of Desiree interacting with Tamanawas, her ancestor. And if you go and you speak to Indigenous people and you ask them about their connection to their land, their connection has been developed over tens of thousands of years through all histories, through culture, through traditions, what we call intangible heritage. For scientists, it's a very different process. What we do is we go and observe, and we look and we record and we measure, and then we publish our work, whether it's through journal papers or books or whatever it might be, or we talk at conferences. But what a lot of people have found who have worked to look at the disconnect between Indigenous communities, global majority communities, and science itself is that we are not getting through. There is a reason why there is a barrier between all of these global cultures and Western science. And principally, it's to do with this, the cold language. For some reason, geology, for some reason, I say some reason, I know what the reason is. The language does not resonate with the general public. People have published books about geology for hundreds of years, there are publishing books today, but the language being used, the tone, the level of engagement is so far removed from people's hearts, we stop feeling anything for the landscapes we're in. And this is what really interests me, is how can we begin to put some feeling back into our science? How can we put some feeling back into how we relate and engage with rock? I think I've got the answer now, but it's taken me about 2 years to get there, and a lot of work. Okay. First off, I recommend that if you want to go down this journey of exploring this connecting geographies between Indigenous science, traditional knowledge, and Western science, is to go and read Braiding Sweetgrass by Robert Ball Kimmerer. So what she talks about is animacy in nature, that actually all aspects of the natural world, whether it's biotic or abiotic, like rivers and rocks, everything has a spirit, everything has a voice, everything has a story. And it's how we embrace and accept those stories that puts us on a path towards empathy and ethical thinking as geographers and as scientists. And in my hand, what you can see, this is the only time I'm going to talk about the Jurassic Coast in this talk, but in my hand, you can see a piece of 200 million year old limestone that I'm holding. And that rock, for me, as a scientist, tells a story about an underwater world that no longer exists. It's Jurassic in age, there's an ammonite in it, but what it's also saying to me is this beautiful story about ancient worlds that no longer exist, about creatures that are now extinct. It connects me on a very spiritual level. It's where I live, it's where I belong. And I think when Robin talks about the animacy of nature, there's a bit of a shift in your mind you have to go through. It's taken me 2 years to go on a journey through that shift, to come to a place where I understand the synthesis between spiritualities and science. It's a journey you have to take. You have to take a very open heart and an open mind to do that. But when you come to the end of that journey, where you are is quite remarkable. You transform as a person. And certainly this whole process of researching and writing the book has been utterly life-changing. I wanted to show you this comment from Elder Mabel Horton and Elder Sherry Copenas from First Nations communities in Northwest Territories. And this is really interesting because I think you're probably wondering, well, why would I study or talk about Indigenous stories? What relevance does it have to geography? What relevance does it have to earth science? And actually, when we put the Indigenous stories and the global majority kind of wisdom against Western science, what we find is that actually the knowledge that we claim as scientists, as the supremacy of knowledge, was all there all along in these communities anyway. They knew about how the world had changed. They knew about the origins of certain features. They knew all along. And what has happened over their lifetimes and generations as those stories were passed down. And the stories basically are memories and experiences of how their people used to experience the world. And yes, there are fantastical myths and legends, quite extraordinary stories, but at the heart of the essence of the story is a connection with nature that we in the Western world, I'm not going to use myself in that, but I would say the majority of the people in the Western world have lost. And I'll explain why that might have happened in a minute, because I interviewed someone on such matters. So, science is not the only way of knowing the origins of our world, and indeed any part of the natural or abiotic or biotic aspects of our world. What you're looking at is an outcrop of the Acasta gneiss. This is the oldest continuous sequence of rocks anywhere in the world. The rocks are about 4.02 billion years old, and if you consider that the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, if you haven't, I've never been there, it's very difficult to get here in the Northwest Territories, but touching these rocks takes you back to the creation of time. This is what it looked like. So these rocks, these Acasta gneiss, originally formed as granitoids. So these are the earliest rocks that formed from the cooling of the magma that had coalesced to form our very infant planet. Now, as the magma began to cool down, it actually began to form these granitoid rocks, and it began to form cratons. So cratons are the very earliest primitive continents. And then at some later stage, those granitoid rocks would have been metamorphosed into the gneiss, which is what you see here. But there's a crystal locked inside this rock called zircon, and zircon, as it formed during this period of time, locked deep inside its radioactive elements. It would be uranium-235. It locked inside those crystals of zircon the time at which that rock began to form, that ancient granitoid, and those zircon crystals were able to survive all sorts of metamorphic processes. One of the key things, the developments in our understanding, and I have to use let's just see if I can play this here. In 1967, so plate tectonics theory was the paper by Mackenzie. I can't remember his colleague's name on that paper. 1967, the paper was published that theorized, that had finally kind of found an explanation for the movement of the plates on Earth. Okay, so 1967, it still feels. I mean, I lecture on cruise lines, and people, they are quite kind of ancient people on cruise lines sometimes, and they come up to me and say, I remember being in a classroom and like basically learning about plate tectonics for the first time. I was like, I mean, it's amazing. It's amazing to meet people who still remember a time before this theory was published. I love meeting those folks. So this is one, so maybe some of you in this audience might have just offended you, so I'm really sorry. I'm a youngster, but yeah, don't look that young. Plate tectonics, 1967. So, this is a very modern theory of how our world came to be. So remember the story, this is about a ball of magma 4.5 billion years ago, cooling down, those first rocks kind of forming the very first primitive continents called cratons. That then began to shift and move around, and then we have, the world as we know it. If we go back to the ancient stories told by some indigenous communities across the world, they are quite remarkable, because there is a story from an Inuit community in the Northwest Territories called Where Our World Came From. And I'm not going to read it out for you word for word, you can see that in the book, but essentially the story goes was that their animals were, the animals of the world were living on a kind of small raft in the middle of an ocean, and they were jostling against each other, and they just wanted a piece of land where they could call home, where they could play and run and kind of, have their families. And basically there was the raven, and he was in charge of the group, and he said, right, we are all going to go and find some land. And so he tasked each animal to dive into the water to bring up a piece of earth, to see if they could find earth. So each animal dove into the water, the muskrat, the otter, there was a duck, there was a scoter, there were all sorts of creatures that dived into the water, but sadly they didn't come back. And it was the beaver, who was known to be a hard worker, and he was the last one to try. And so he dove into the water, he went all the way to the bottom, and when he came up, he had a clump of earth held in his paws. He didn't survive the journey, And what the animals did was they pulled the mud out of his paws and they struck a piece of wood through it, and the raven put it onto the surface of the water and let it float away. And then using his magic, the kind of that clump of earth began to grow, and as it grew, it formed the land, and the land became the place where the animals moved to create their lives. And so this beautiful story that's been told for over 10,000 years by these, and there are all sorts of variations on this story, as you can imagine, and I've spoken to 2 different communities there. In one story, it's the muskrat that kind of comes up with a clump of earth. In this particular story, I told you it's the beaver. But essentially, the earth is born from a piece of earth. Our planet is born from a piece of earth that grows, that extends and covers the water. So there is this beautiful symmetry of thinking before 1967, before the theory of plate tectonics. And I think it just goes to show you that there is wisdom, that people have always asked and questioned why our landscape looks the way it does. Not just scientists that have done that. Here's another story that kind of helps us understand about how important Indigenous knowledge, Indigenous science is to our understanding of dynamic processes on Earth. I want to talk a little bit about Pele. She's the goddess of fire and volcano. She's very important in native Hawaiian culture. And her ancestral home is Kilauea in Hawaii. Her story is really interesting. I want to go back to her picture. So she is a very, very important figure because she is the creator of the Hawaiian chain of islands. And the story goes as follows. Pele was a very beautiful woman. She was very desirable. She had a sister, and she ended up kind of seducing her sister's husband. Her sister presumably wasn't very happy with this, and then vowed to kill her. So Pele was obviously terrified of being murdered by her sister. She took her digging tool called pa'au, and she went across the ocean, fleeing the murderous rage of her sister. And as she stopped in the ocean, she decided to try and find somewhere to hide. So she would use her tool to dig into the ocean to try and create a place to hide. And every time she dug, she would create an island. And because she was the goddess of fire, she created a volcano. So she would stay on that island, but the volcano would erupt, and there would be a plume of smoke that rose up into the atmosphere, and her sister knew exactly where to find her, and then would come straight after her. Pele had to go on the run. So she created a successive series of islands which tracked her flight from her sister. Eventually, she came to the final island and she had a stand-up with her sister. Her sister won the battle, she killed Pele, and as her sister was walking away, Pele's spirit rose up out of the island, and then both of them realized that vengeance had been done, and that Pele's spirit would forever live on the island of Kilauea, in the mountain, in the volcano of Kilauea, on the island of Hawaii. And so it's a really enigmatic, beautiful story that tells us about the evolution of the chain of islands that are Hawaii. Let's look at the science. So we know that, Western science, we know that Hawaii is sitting on top of a magma hotspot on the Pacific plate. As the plate is moving over, the plume of magma is rising up into the crust, the oceanic crust. It's melting the crust, creating a cocktail of minerals, which then erupt and form the volcanic islands. And what you can see here, which is what the native Hawaiians knew thousands of years ago, is that the chain of islands differ in age. As they came from Tahiti on their boats, so they were migrating across the ocean, they discovered these chain of islands. And what they saw was that each island differed as they travelled along the chain. Some of them were very eroded, some of them looked a lot older, and obviously the activism of the volcanoes informed their understanding of these islands as well. And so this story of Pele migrating across the chain of islands, that story is actually a geographical map that was passed down through thousands of years of native Hawaiians to help them understand about the kind of the geography of the islands, the archipelago. So it's not just a beautiful story, it's a map, it's a geographical map that has been told through story and song and dance. And when you go and explore some of the cultural traditions within Native Hawaiian culture, and I do recommend that you go and have a look at this video. This is Kahalawa. It's a film by The Atlantic. And this is a park ranger by the same name. And what the film does beautifully is it's a story about how he rediscovers his connection to Pele, the goddess of fire. And the reason why I say he discovers again, he rediscovers his origins, is because when the British occupied the native Hawaiian islands, they tried to eradicate the native Hawaiian language, and they tried to eradicate native Hawaiian culture. And so this gentleman here grew up never knowing what his name meant, because he was not allowed to speak native Hawaiian. And then at a later stage in his life, he discovers his ancestry, he discovers his spiritual connection to the goddess. And it's an incredibly moving moment. I think it's a really beautiful video to watch with students, because what it does is it begins to build empathy and understanding of how these stories connect with the scientific understanding that Earth scientists have with the Hawaiian Islands themselves. Beautiful, beautiful message as well. I love what he says when he says it's all connected, because this is about connecting geographies. This is about connecting different belief systems with the Western science that we know and we understand, and when you put them together, then we begin to feel something for these rocks. I want to just move into just talking about the birth of mountains as well, and a particular mountain actually. Let's switch over to California. This is a geological image of the formation of the Sierra Nevada mountains in California. You can see the Farallon plate. It's an oceanic plate. It's being subducted, pulled beneath a continental plate, which is a North American plate. As the Farallon plate is being pulled underneath, it's called slab pull, so it's being drawn into the mantle, it's melting, and as it melts, plumes of magma are rising up into the crustal plate, melting here, and then erupting or getting trapped underneath, just underneath the Earth's crust. Now, when plumes of magma move up into the crust, sometimes they erupt as volcanoes, as you see, for example, volcanoes all over the world. Here, in this situation, those plumes of magmas are trapped here for whatever reason, and then the magma cools down to form a rock called granite. And I call this the patient rock because granite is a result of magma trapped in a chamber or trapped in layers of other rocks. This particular piece of magma, this particular piece of granite, would have taken about 2 to 3 million years to cool down once it became trapped in a cavity or a fissure just underneath the Earth's crust. And during that time of cooling, what happens is that the crystals begin to form. The chemicals in the magma separate out, and they separate out to form this crystalline structure. That's why it's a patient rock. So if you go into anywhere like Cornwall or particularly where you see the tors in Cornwall and Devon, they are also very patient rocks. They've taken 2 to 3 million years to cool when magma plumes have intruded the crust. Now, this particular is a granodiorite. So this particular rock you will see exposed here. This is Half Dome. This is its Western name. So this is the name given to it by European settlers, Half Dome. This is made out of granodiorite. But when I was kind of investigating, it wasn't always called that. It had another name because for 6,000 years prior to European settlers coming into the valley, the Yosemite Valley, it was the Arwinichi people that lived here. And they had a beautiful story that again has been passed down through successive generations that help us understand the nature and the spirituality of this landscape. The story is as follows. Tisayak and her husband were traveling through the Yosemite Valley, and they were hot, and they were hungry, and they were thirsty. And Tisayak was carrying a basket of loaves on her back as well. And as they walked through the valley, Tisea came across a lake of water. And she said to her husband, I'm so thirsty, I need to rest. And he said, well, look, there's a lake up ahead. Why don't you go and have a drink and I will catch you up? Because he was behind her, he was very tired. And so she went on ahead and drank from the lake. And she was so thirsty that she drank the lake dry. And so when her husband arrived, he was absolutely furious that she hadn't left any water for him. And so they had this huge argument. And they were arguing, and the great creator that looked down upon them, he was very, very upset by what he saw happening. And so he decided to turn both of them to stone. And her husband became a kind of granitic peak on one side of Yosemite Valley, and he turned Tisea into this peak here. And what's really interesting is Tisea, so this story is probably about 6,000 years old, and the reason why she's called Tisea is that she's this particular this particular granitic peak is a memory of sadness and regret and shame. And this is how the Native American communities have seen what we call Half Dome. This is not a place to be conquered. This is not a place to climb on top of and be happy and exclaim that you conquered the world. This is a place to remind us of humility. And what's also interesting is that in the ancient stories, they speak of Tisea's tears streaking the face of the rock. What you actually see, as scientists see, is lichen. And so what this tells us, in terms of scientific understanding, is that these rocks weather incredibly slowly, that the lichen is still there, it has been there for thousands of years. And so our understanding of the weathering of the landscape, the lichen that's basically digesting the rock, all of this ties into the memories and the relationship that our Lichi people, now the Miwok tribe, have with the landscape. It's a really kind of beautiful coalescence of different knowledge systems. I want to quickly, because I've got about 10 minutes left, I've only gone through a fraction of the slides that I planned to. Here is the story of Ponamu, another kind of story of geography told through indigenous stories. Ponamu is ophiolite, it's a greenstone, and it forms when the oceanic crust is being pulled beneath the continental plate here. This is Aotearoa, New Zealand. As it's pulled beneath, splinters of the oceanic crust are metamorphosed and pushed onto the land. They appear in these areas here, but there is a beautiful story told by Maori that is a geographical map to where to find this sacred rock. And this relates to a kind of a river spirit called Putini. And the story goes as follows. Putini spies, he's a river god, so he goes up and down the rivers looking after his own essence, Punamu, which is the sacred greenstone. And he sees one day a woman bathing in the river. Her name is Waitiki, and he quite likes her. So he kind of says to himself, I might just steal her away. And that's what he does. When her husband comes back to the river to find Waitiki, he sees that she's gone. And Putini knows what he's done. He knows he's guilty. And so what he does is he tries to escape the murderous husband. There's lots of kind of people chasing after one another in these stories. But what he does, Putini, is he races down the river system across the island, and wherever he rests, you can find his essence. And at the end of the story, he realizes that he can never escape this husband who desperately wants his wife back. And so what he does is he turns the beautiful woman into his own essence, and he lays her down in the riverbed, which, let's see, I haven't got the picture of the riverbed there, but he lays her down in the riverbed, and she becomes the Punamu, which Maori hold as very sacred. There are only certain places that are known to them where the greenstone can be found. And so it's an incredibly sacred rock. It's imbued with power, it's imbued with privilege and status. And it's just a really beautiful story that combines that understanding of geography, of where the processes of subduction and kind of uplift have caused that stone to appear and manifest on the landscape. It aligns beautifully with this kind of cultural narrative of the spirit fleeing from the murderous husband. I just want to touch upon This story here again, this is from the Lakota in South Dakota. And this is a really, I talked a little bit earlier on, I showed you the picture of the chief on horseback. Well, the Lakota hold very sacred an area called the Black Hills in South Dakota. Here they are, this has a core of granite in the center of the dome, and then surrounding the dome, a bit like a kind of basket, like if you have nesting bowls, surrounding the core of the granite are limestone sedimentary layers. So you can imagine at one point the magma intruded into the sedimentary rocks, it uplifted and contorted them, and then those softer sedimentary rocks have eroded away, causing the peak of the granite to become exposed. What's really interesting with this story is that the Lakota, it's part of their creation story. The hills, the Black Hills, are an incredibly sacred place that marks the beginning of creation. And this is part of their kind of sacred ancestral landscape. It's called Six Grandfathers Mountain. And when I spoke about European settlers coming into South Dakota, discovering gold on the lands, the American government, who had signed over, so they had seized a lot of the ancestral lands, they had signed over Six Grandfathers Mountain and the surrounding areas to the Lakota as part of the Fort Laramie Treaty. Now, when illegal prospectors went into the indigenous lands, found gold, the US government took the land back. So they took the land back and then expelled, dispossessed Lakota from their ancestral lands. They then did something else. They then decided to carve the presidential heads into the sacred site. So that is the story of Mount Rushmore. You probably are not aware of that. But obviously this is a very contested site. This is a place where Indigenous people are, it's #landback, they are campaigning for the return of the ancestral lands back to their nation. Because you have to really understand this is a very, very sacred place in their culture and in their teachings. I just want to, I've only got about 8 minutes left. I'm so sorry, I'm racing through as many stories as I can. I just want to end up finishing with this. This is a story very, very close to my heart. I've just come back from Portland, Oregon, where I've had a chance to talk to some Indigenous people about this particular ancestor. I mentioned Desiree in the first slide. This is a Willamette meteorite, otherwise known as Tamanawas. It came to Oregon on a raft of ice at the end of the last ice age. And what I want to show you is how far Tamanawas travelled. So obviously Tamanawas is a meteorite. It landed about 20,000 years ago on an ice sheet just in the north here. This is a picture of what North America was like at the end of the ice age. It travelled on an ice raft in what is called the Missoula Floods, all the way down to Portland, Oregon. And this is where it landed, came to rest in the Willamette Valley. It was an incredibly sacred rock for the Clackamas and the Chinook people. When they discovered it, they knew that there was something special about it, that it was like from another world. It was made of iron and nickel. So even for the Clackamas and the Chinook people, they knew it was incredibly special. They knew it was otherworldly. Over time, when the European settlers came and the Chinook and the Clackamas people were dispossessed of their lands, Tamanawas was taken away, and I'll tell you a little bit about his story in a minute. But here is a beautiful image. This is not for distribution on social media, but this is a beautiful image of a 3D printed version of the ancestor being worshipped as a visitor from another world. He's called Tamanawas, literally means visitor from another world. And here is a child from the Grandon tribe dipping an arrowhead into the waters that would have collected in its cavities when it was lying in the valley, because it was so sacred. The rainwater was considered to be healing. It was considered to guide the arrows when they went hunting. However, Tamanawas was stolen, abused, taken away from its ancestral lands, and this was all kind of part of the dispossession of the lands from the Native American people. Here you can see this chap here who's hauling it away on a wagon. He was then charged with stealing it by the Oregon Iron and Steel Company. They then wanted to melt it down, which was horrendous. but somebody came in, bought it for a lot of money, and then donated it to the American Museum of Natural History. Now, the Grandron tribe have campaigned for about 20 or 30 years to have the meteorite Tamanawas repatriated to them. That's not happened, but they have an agreement with the tribe that the tribe can go up to New York to conduct the ceremonies. Whilst it was in the care of the museum, Tamanawas was sliced and cut for science, and a lot of the elders have described this as almost cutting an indigenous body, because for them, Tamanawas is human, it is an ancestor, and to desecrate the ancestor in that way was unspeakable. So there is an agreement now that Tamanawas is not desecrated or cut under the care of the museum, but when I was there about 3 or 4 weeks ago, I had a chance. This is also not to be photographed or shown on social media, but I had a chance to hold a fragment of the ancestor, an incredibly moving experience. And when I was there with Travis Stewart, the curator of the collections, something happened between us. We knew that deep spiritual connection that we hold, that love for rock, we both felt it, because I have this connection with rock, not just as a scientist, but as someone, as a Hindu, who's discovered the importance of rock within my own culture and my own faith, an incredibly moving experience. I think the key thing that I want to leave you with, because I want to do a quick reading from my book, I want to reassure you that science can sit comfortably alongside myths and stories about our natural world. I wanted to show you this picture of this tomb I saw in the Valley of the Kings in Luxor, Egypt. In the hieroglyphics are stories of Osiris, who is the god of cycles, of life and death. What you can see in the tomb, what I saw as a geologist, was the cycles of life and death in mollusks, in ancient marine life that once existed in the tropical sea. And what I saw were layers of shells of ancient marine life coming and going, and on top of that rock is carved the hieroglyphics, the messages, the stories from Osiris. And so our scientific understanding of the world is intertwined with these cultural stories. It's intertwined. They shouldn't compete. They actually ally with each other. And when they ally, they give us a sense of ethics, love, and feeling. And what I want to really leave with you is this kind of understanding of how do we bridge the science and spiritualities that exist in the world. We do that through humility, and we do that through empathy. And I wanted to show you this statement from a member of the Ute Nation. They're working with a team at the University of Arizona, who I'm working with, a team of anthropologists. Isn't it interesting to see the view from indigenous people about when they view rock formations, or rock generally? Rainbow Bridge is an incredibly special sacred place for 11 different tribes. And they view the arches, the bridges, as portals to another world. What they will often do, the elders of the tribe, because it's only very important people that are allowed to do this, they will go and sit by the rocks. They will sit there for days at a time, and they will listen, and they will commune, and they will talk to the rocks to try to seek wisdom. And do you know what? That's exactly what I do. I go to the rocks, I look at them, I observe, I record, I measure, I touch, I feel, and I'm gaining wisdom from them about what the earth used to be. Remember that picture I showed you on the first slide, the sandstone rocks from Petra? I was doing exactly the same thing as a member of the Ute Nation, except I have a Western scientific mind, so how much can I benefit from understanding their beautiful stories? And I think what I want to end with is a reading. I'm just going to get my paper here. And I wanted to end, and this is also not for photography or reuse, this is some words that were sent to me by an elder, Kingi Biddle from the Ngati Wakeu Iwi, Maori tribe in New Zealand. And he said to me that the rocks do whisper. We've just forgotten to listen to what they are saying. An incredibly meaningful collection of words that have mana. And that's what he said to me. He said, my words have mana. Even these words I'm sending to you in an email have mana. And that is why I request that you don't reuse or take a photograph of them. What I want to read for you now is a short extract from the book. It's 7 o'clock. Can you hang on for another couple of minutes? I hope so. I know you're hungry and want to head off. Okay, so this particular reading I've taken from chapter 4 called The Restless Fire. If you can remember the rock that I found when I was 12 years old, this is the story of this rock. There is an unassuming black rock that sits on my bookshelf at home. It is easily overshadowed by other extroverted specimens that show off their rock star personalities proudly to anyone who enters my office. For example, a chunk of white Cornish granite shimmers like a silver sequin dress every time I walk past. The golden gleam of a pyritized ammonite, enviably found by my husband, often catches my eye. Every rock in my collection has a story, and not just in the geological sense. They are solid blocks of memorable moments that have made me into the person I am today. A natural history museum of the self, if you like. But it is this dark piece of lava rock that I reach for most often. Its surface is pockmarked with vesicles, small cavities that formed when gas bubbles became trapped inside the cooling lava. The uniform blackness of the rock is mottled by the rich red soil of Kenya, which has remained trapped inside these tiny holes for over 30 years. As I hold it in my palm, the many jagged peaks that formed as the lava cooled in mid-flow dig deep into my palm. The sharpness of the sensation triggers a memory of the moment the rock first whispered to me as a young girl. Now here is where I pause, because in the book, what I do is I give the rocks a voice. They come forward to tell you their story in their own words, their whispers, if you like. Here, the rock begins its story. Deep beneath the Earth's surface, I swirled with joy in an infinite display of geological acrobatics. But one day, a sudden force projected me upwards, and as I broke through the crust, I entered a strange new world. I screamed in terror as I saw this cold new light, and my body plunged back down onto the land, obliterating everything in its path. As the heaving mass of lava spewed violently from the volcano, it forced me to creep forward. I wept with sorrow as my flames licked around innocent living things, burning them to ash. The human voices, they howled in fear as they ran away. They called me Shaitani, the devil, evil. In my aching loneliness, I grew cold and weary as my body became a mass of jagged black rock that covered the land. As I slumbered for hundreds of years, my only companions were the wind and the rain, settling me and soothing my fall. Eventually, I found peace, nourishing and supporting new life that had found a home in my cracks and openings. Then, one day, I felt her, footsteps as light as air, treading over my surface. They moved with a delicate ease, avoiding my contortions that had caused others to fall and curse my name. She was different, aware, awake to my story. I whispered to her and told her my secrets. She nodded in understanding as she picked up parts of my body and put them in her pocket. Tell my story, I whispered to her as she left. Remember me. I know you're punching up. There's a postcard. If you would like to take one, there are 2 volunteers who will stand by the doors. If you would like to take one away. If you are a member of Girl Guiding, you're a unit leader, you can come and get a Girl Guiding badge from me as well for attending. Thank you so much.